Good afternoon again. This is a very exciting session we have here because I think the very fact that the Che has been able to provide a platform to discuss one of the most urgent and dehumanizing aspects of our society today stands for why we are able to not make ourselves irrelevant. Actually, it's quite important to note that only if we do have the courage to bring to the table and scrutinize these fundamental issues through the lens of economic expertise can we actually, claim to have a right to exist as a center in actually doing something that can create knowledge that is meaningful and purposeful. And of course, the complete annihilation of Palestinian lives in the past year and a half, the absolute erasure of schools, hospitals, universities, the intentional starvation, the killing of journalists, teachers, and doctors, with the obliteration of any form of international law, I think exposes some deep realities of our capitalist economy that we cannot shy from discovering. So again, the genocide in action is inseparable from our socioeconomic system, and that is why the responsibility of economists is to take this topic as ultimately a lens that discloses much more global tendencies that trap all of us. So the fact that we are all ultimately Palestinians needs to be taken very seriously in a theoretical sense. And this is why we have here incredibly distinguished panels of economic experts who have studied the political economy of occupation for many, many years. And it is really an honor that they all came from very far, from Germany, from the West Bank, from the East Coast, so Ibrahim less far than others. But anyway, all motivated to be here with us. So thank you all for joining. I will just briefly introduce, I think I'll do what Geert did, which is introduce one at a time. I think it's more effective, actually. So the first to speak is Raja, is that correct? So Raja, please come up, and I'm going to introduce you in the meantime. So Raja Khalidi is originally from Jerusalem and has lived most of his life in the Middle East and Europe. He was trained as a development economist with a BA from Oxford University and MS from University of London. In PPE, very important, in PPE. He worked as an economist from 1985 to 2013 with the United Nations Conference of Trade and Development, where he was coordinator of its program of assistance to the Palestinian people, head of its debt and development finance branch, and chief of the office of the director in the Division of Globalization and Development Strategies. He was principal or contributing author to over 50 UNCTAD reports and studies on the Palestinian economy and its development prospects, and has published widely in scholarly journals and international media. Since 2019, he has served as Director General of the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, MAS, the premier Palestinian economic think tank, which we hope to have connections with in the development of our center as well. Thank you, Raja.
Thank you. Thank you all. I really am excited as you are about this conference. And I must thank Clara and Scott to begin with, of course, for making this possible. The University of Tulsa for its openness and providing a safe space for this project to develop. I hope the President has a chance to hear what we have to say today as well. The people of Tulsa I find very kind, gentle, welcoming, and warm, and I think that's important too. It says something about your character. But of course, I have to single out Ibrahim Shikaki for having put me on Clara's heterodox radar, I think. I'm not sure, but we'll talk about that later. Anyhow, so before talking about the specific Palestinian political economy in the context of settler colonialism genocide, I just do want to say, having listened today to the very stimulating discussions about heterodoxy and orthodoxy in Palestinian economic studies in general. And Palestine, in fact, and this is in a sense a response to the president, that we are coming from a tradition of dialogue and struggle, if you wish, of ideas between heterodoxy, or between the orthodoxy that prevailed and dominated much of the past 30 years, which was, of course, spearheaded by intimate involvement of the Bretton Woods institutions in Palestinian economic and social policy making, and the heterodoxy traditions of research on the Palestinian economy. And it was the task of heterodox economics in Palestine, which, by the way, are mainly non-Marxian, to not only critique the mainstream and explain why neoliberal recipes were wrong for such an economy in particular, but no less challenging was to build a counter-narrative and a feasible set of alternative policies, drawing on successful heterodox developing countries' experiences, something that is, of course, less facile. And that's where I think the challenge lies for us, Ibrahim, my colleagues. And I think it's also where there's this potentially radical intersection, listening today, that it might lie there somewhere between the study of global socialist experiences, which I'm surprised there's no panel on that, you know, Lenin and Mao and all of that, and the Arab socialists and the Cuban socialists. Anyhow, the intersection between that, the critique of capitalism, which is not only a Marxian critique, and goes broader in some ways, and a reasonable and feasible set of heterodox policies that can actually gain traction in the world as it is, Mr. Galbraith, as you were mentioning yesterday. So, that's my first comment on your conference. As far as Palestinian political economy, the first thing, I have 5 things I want to say. So the first thing is that to comprehend the shape, the meaning, and the function of the political economy of Palestine in today's and tomorrow's still turbulent world, 2 parallel historical processes that have proceeded apace for a century, sometimes overlapping, sometimes complementing, or sometimes contradicting each other, should be kept in mind. First, a fundamental, apparently existential, it would appear now, struggle between an ever-expanding Zionist nation-state project, currently defined as intended to ensure the sovereignty of the Jewish people in the whole of the land of Israel, as per law in Israel, and also entailing, as we've seen, a set of systematic measures of military occupation, colonization and settlement of the land, economic extraction. Of course, all of this alongside what? An unfulfilled Palestinian aspiration for national self-determination, which itself entailed a range of violent armed, civil, and diplomatic resistance in different forms over the century. So that's the first process. The second one, of course, are the normal processes and stages of economic growth, market economics, capital and class formation, liberalization, financialization, and an uneven development that emerged impressively between the Israeli Jewish economy, metropole, if I may, and in a distorted and uneven pattern in the Arab-Palestinian economies within the orbit of this Israeli metropole. So that's my first point that we need to keep in mind. And basically, I'm just here trying to give you some principles as far as I'm concerned, lessons, let's say, and we can talk about the economics of genocide later in the question time. Secondly, the changing political economy of Palestine has thus followed both of those trajectories. And it is, in fact, the synthesis of their interaction and contradictions, whereby the imperatives of nationhood have regularly trumped those of economic development. In Israel, the full potentials of liberalization and even more economic accumulation than we have seen have actually been constrained and undermined by the ideological interests of Zionism, those of upholding a system of differential rights vis-a-vis the dependent Palestinian economies. That's been a cost to neoliberal development for Israel. And for Palestinians, a frustrated movement of national self-determination, which we call the primary contradiction in Leninist tradition, continues to take precedence over the secondary contradiction of the denial of human, social, and economic rights of millions of Palestinians under occupation and in Israel. That's number 2. Third, the political economy of Palestine is thus not a stable trajectory or always a struggle between the same powers or parties. Indeed, we must always avoid complacency in our analysis of political economic dynamics, of the stakeholders and the interests, whereby the best laid plans and strategies can be rendered asunder by the tensions and contradictions lurking underneath the surface of an otherwise placid landscape. Now, taking the longest view we could take, we can discern four broad phases in the development of the political economy of Palestine, historical phases, until October 7th, which were separated by major shocks that resulted in a significant reshuffling at each stage of the battlefield, so to speak. First, the pre-1948 Palestine, in which the core powers of the respective national movements and economic structures emerged in that period. They were already lopsided in favor of the Jewish economy and Zionist political goals, ending with the 1948 Nakba. This so-called dual economy is what the economists at the time termed it, which was basically industrializing Jewish economy and a still agrarian Arab economy, was the forerunner, in fact, of today's center-periphery structural economic relations that continue to underpin Israeli political supremacy in Palestine. And here I'm talking about distinct regional economies in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in Gaza, and inside Israel. Second phase, if you wish, historically speaking, is the 1948-67 period, where you had an Israeli state building and socialist market economy building amidst a Palestinian demographic dispersion, material dispossession calculated today at $750 billion, and political fragmentation, with half of the people turned into refugees in 5 Arab host countries, others falling under Israeli, Jordanian, and Egyptian rule. So, of course, this disrupted any pre-1948 trajectories of capital accumulation, class formation, or development in any conventional sense of the terms. Shock. So shock, shock. Then you have 1967 shock, whereby you have a post-war expansion of Israeli effective sovereignty throughout the breadth of Palestine, ushering in a period of so-called military occupation and direct rule over Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. This entailed a new set of economic dependencies. Labor, which we'll hear some more about from Lamees, trade, money, and we can talk about that as well. Even as a unified Palestinian national movement was being consolidated in the 70s and the 80s, and first elaboration, we were just talking with Ibrahim, of a set of national goals and coherent strategies consistent with a national liberation sort of outlook, if you wish, and a strategy alongside, in fact, a strategy of armed resistance against occupation with significant international spillovers. They're still making films about Munich, I can't believe it. Leading to the outbreak of the first Intifada and the first challenge by the people, if you wish, rather than by the PLO and its armed, to this idea of indefinite Israeli occupation. That was 87. Then you have the new break is the breakthrough of Oslo in 1994, whereby Israel appeared to be ready to compromise on its claim over all of Palestine and to accept Palestinian national rights. And this was, in fact, the beginning of another... And this was the beginning of another prolonged phase of a more sophisticated interplay between the politics and the economics of Palestine, and one which was enshrined in an Israeli policy of asymmetric containment, which successfully postponed October 7th by some 30 years, and during which an aggressive and overwhelming settler colonial project unfolded in Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank. Fourth, I need another 5 minutes. While the earlier experiences that I mentioned remain rich material for deeper study of Palestinian economic history, it is this most recent phase that ended in October 7th and the new era in the political economy of Palestine that has come since that I wish to focus on for the remainder of my minutes. Had I addressed this subject in 2023, I would have said that the economy of Palestine had become deeply mired in the unintentional but inevitable fallout from this asymmetric relation that it had been locked into by the Oslo Accords, and that therefore the only policy horizon was one of long-term resilience in the face of prolonged occupation, settlement expansion, and de facto annexation by Israel of the remainder of Palestine. That's the way it looked. Even though the period between 94 and 23 was not an immutable or unchanging structure and each had its own separate phases, but the overriding feature was Israel's ability to manage the conflict without moving towards peace with Palestine. Indeed, by repudiating in the last years any two-state permanent status agreement, even as the PLO continued and continues till today to insist on that outcome. So you had in this Oslo period, this fourth phase that I mentioned, you had these four, if you wish, or three sub-phases. The years until the second intifada of 2000 were actually hopeful, and they were premised on such a solution, the two-state outcome, from the Palestinian point of view. But once Rabin had been eliminated, had been killed by the Israeli right, and the rise of revisionist Zionism under Netanyahu had begun, that goal was effectively removed from the agenda. Then you have, after the Palestinian political division of 2007, the international community reinterpreted the terms of the Oslo Compromise into an agenda of reform and neoliberal, basically, economy building as a pathway to proving Palestinian eligibility for statehood, the famous Salam Fayyad period. Now, once the peace process effectively ended after 2015, with the full assumption of power in Israel and throughout its institutions, the state's institutions, of a series of right-wing, radical right-wing coalitions, economic structural dependencies had cemented by then the divided and besieged and flailing Palestinian regional economies within Israel's orbit. As colonial expansion and settler aggression intensified, a system of violent and discreet enforcement of differential rights in the one apartheid state reality, which legally and politically and economically had emerged. For many scholars of the Palestine economy, the most appropriate theoretical and comparative empirical framework for analyzing these complex relations, and now I'm talking about heterodox scholars, was that of settler colonialism studies. We can talk about that too, but anyhow. Other Marxist analyses, not many, attempted to unpack Palestinian class and capital relations and examine their interrelations with those of settler colonialism. So I'm at finally here. My own work has led me to question the whole national self-determination paradigm, as first elaborated by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and subsequently reiterated in most anti-colonial struggles. According to this doctrine, the necessity of establishing the nation state takes precedence over the class struggle in the building of socialism, which in the Palestinian case has meant failure on both fronts, national and class. Finally, I conclude by noting that the October 7th attack on Israel and Israel's genocidal responses that continue unabated as we speak, I mean, just need to watch Al Jazeera, confirms that Israeli asymmetric containment has failed, and it's no longer an option. Hence, the ability of Israeli neo-Zionists such as Smotrich and Ben-Gvir to hallucinate along with Donald Trump and Jared Kushner of imperialist, capitalist, real estate designs on the Gaza Strip, which happens to entail ethnic cleansing and the denial of all possible rights of the Palestinian people. So the new phase we have entered since 2023, to be honest, is beyond political economy. There is no political economy of genocide that I know of. There is only resistance and survival, which presumably would mean defeating the genocide and not letting it pass. That's still possible. This is first and foremost a task for Palestinian people, one that they remarkably have achieved so far in Gaza, despite the horrible losses and terrible costs, and that for the past few weeks especially has intensified in the West Bank, or as the US government is about to rebaptize the area, Judea and Samaria. So until the full struggle has played out over the coming year, there's not much an economist or any expert can tell you, or as the poet would say, Scott, you don't need a weatherman to tell you how the wind's blowing. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't mention my institute, Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, MAS, www.mas.ps. I left a couple of booklets here of a conference we recently did, so you get an idea of the sort of level and issues we discuss, and also an institutional profile. So anyhow, my water. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raja. Now we have the pleasure of having Lamees Farraj with us. Lamees is a researcher in fiscal policies, public budget, economic and developmental policies, with a strong passion for socioeconomic issues and political economy. Lamees obtained her master's degrees in economics from Birzeit University in 2016, and a bachelor degree in economics from Birzeit University in 2010. Lamees has many publications that are available actually on the website of your current employer, which is?
Aman, Transparency Palestine.
Perfect. So she has many publications there.
Okay. Hello. I'm Lamees Farraj. Today I'm going to present the situation of Palestinian labor who are working on Israeli market. So, I have some slides to show. And well, my presentation, I will focus on my presentation on the Palestinian labor in the Israeli market and why Israeli prefer hiring Palestinian labor, and what's happened after the genocide work and the impact of the suspension of Palestinian workers from Israel on the Palestinian economy as well as on the Israeli economy, especially on construction and agriculture sector, because most of the Palestinian labor, they work on those sectors. And what's happened after the shift in Israeli policies under the current right wing toward the West Bank and also the Palestinian labor, and what's the debate now in Israeli community about replacing the Palestinian labor by Indian or Asian worker or rehiring them. So before I start, I'm just going to give a briefing about the Palestinian-Israeli economic situation. So the Palestinian-Israeli economic situation or relation is a domination relation where Israeli dominate, the Israeli economy dominate the Palestinian economy, which appear through the asymmetrical power and the subordinate status of the Palestinian economy within the colonial hierarchy. And the first element, the first manifestation of this relation is the labor flow. The Palestinian labor constitute around 20% of the Palestinian labor force. So this is why this important topic, because fifth of the Palestinian community, they depend on their income from Israeli market, because fifth of the Palestinian, they work in Israeli market. So why this happened, how the Palestinian transfer from self-employed, working on their agriculture and their small lands, and how they transform to a wage worker in Israeli market. This has happened before 1948, when the Palestinian labor, they went to work on Jewish industries because of the land acquisition, because of the Israeli policies, because of the policies for impoverishment the Palestinian community, because of the demolition. And this relation continued until before the 7th of October, the genocide war. And it was like, it was organized by the Paris Protocol, where in Article 7, it's mentioned that both sides will attempt to maintain the normality of movement of labor between them, subject to each side to determine from time to time extent and condition of the labor movement into its area. So in this statement, it could be seen that we have like a symmetrical power, like we have two countries with the same power. But in fact, the only one that determines this relation is the Israeli side. And this is not referred to the supply and demand in the Israeli labor market, but it's basically the main driver for this relation is the security and political issues. And this is what I will also explain later in this slide. So as I said, before the war, there was around 20% of the Palestinian labor work in Israeli market, and most of them, 80% of them, now they are unemployed because because of the suspension of the permission to go to Israel. So now they are become unemployed without any source of income. And the debate in Israeli center on the trade-off between the security and economy. So some of the political, they are advocate for rehiring Palestinian because of the security issues and because they think that if you hire the Palestinian and they put them and rehire them and make their priority to just like to work, they will not be affiliated or they will not make anything like or to be part of any resistance activity. So they will be more interested in like earning their income and in their work, while the others, they such as Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who is the Minister of Finance, they are pushing for a permanent ban on Palestinian, and they don't want to rehire Palestinian in their market. So there was a fluctuation of the flow of Palestinian worker into Israeli market, and this fluctuation based also on the security issues. For example, between the 1967 and 1993, there was around a third of Palestinian, they are working on Israeli market. But after 1991 and the Paris Protocol, because Israeli, they issuing the individual permit. So when they issuing this permit, the number of the people that they are working in Israel, it's decreased, because this permit means that to have this permit to enter Israel, to have this permit, they do a security check. So if you want to work there, you have to be, as they in their on Israeli perspective, clean. That means that your priority is only your work. You are not even work in any even social activity or any movement. So after the second Intifada, there was like a campaign also boycotting working in Israel, and also because of the political condition, also the number decreased. But before the genocide word, it's around like 20%. It's around 200,000 people who work in Israeli market. So those people, why they are working there? They were working there because of the deterioration of economic situation in Palestine. We don't have any, the Palestinian market cannot accept all of this labor because of the continuous policies of the Israeli and the impoverishment of the economic and the situation in Palestine. So those people, when they go and work on Israeli market, the impact is not limited to their improving their conditions and their economic situation, but rather it's also because when they are going there, they earn double or 3 times more than the Palestinian who work on Palestinian labor market. So the remittances that come from Israel, it's around $3 to $4 billion each year, which is around half of the public budget. Half of the public budget. The remittances, and it's also about 20 to 25% of the GDP. So this is when now they are unemployed. So this is affect and contribute in deterioration of the economic situation in the West Bank. So. And this also contributes to deepening economic dependency, creating distortion in the Palestinian labor market, and also fostering an economic lacking productive base capable of driving the economy and create opportunity for those workers. And now, why Israeli they are interested or why they are hiring the Palestinian labor? Actually, they are not like we are not. The issue for why they are hiring and deploying the Palestinian labor, not because they want to exploit, even though they are exploiting the Palestinian labor, but the main driver for this is politically. Because even we are 20% of the Palestinian labor force work in Israeli market, but they are just only 3% of the Israeli labor market force. And most of them, they are work on construction. And this is a very vital sector and has a multiplier effect. So first of all, why they are hiring Palestinian labor? Because of the economic domination. They believe that they can dominate us by economic, and this is what we see, because they are working on fostering developmental impoverishment through land and resource acquisition and restriction on Palestinian growth. And secondly, because of the security purpose, where Shlomo Gazit, he is the Israeli first military coordinator, he said labor migration serves not only economic interests, there is an economic interest. there is a benefit from hiring Palestinian labor, but this is not only serve the economic interests, but also politically and security purposes within the broader context of the Israeli colonial rule in the occupied Palestinian territory. So on the economic side and the economic benefit, the wage of Palestinian worker are lower than the foreign worker, and they are bring the at the end of the day the Palestinian labor he go back to his home. So because we have like we share the custom and we have a free trade. So we most of the export in Palestine comes from Israel. So the money will back to Israel because the labor, they will spend their money in Palestinian economy, but actually most of it will go back to Israel. And also Palestinian worker, he know how, because this is our land actually, Israel is our Palestinian land. So the Palestinian worker, they have a well-inherited experience in construction, and they know the land, and they know they know the details of how to work. Comparing to any foreign labor. So what's happened after the genocide, and what's the impact of barring a Palestinian worker from Israel on the Palestinian economy? First of all, there was like a impact on their individual level because they are now unemployed. Most of them, they are unemployed. So we are talking about 1/5 of the Palestinian population. They are without any source of income. So they are looking for any available job. They postponing their check payment. They postponing many projects that they are going to do. They also become a competitor to the Palestinian labor who are working in the Palestinian market. So, and on the macro level, because I said that there is a remittances which is around $3 to $4 billion. So the unemployment has risen the West Bank to 35%. The GDP has sharply declined, and also the citizen purchasing power has decreased. So while also there is an effect on the Israeli market, because not all of the Israelis, they want Palestinians to go back and to work, not because of the security issues, but also there is an economic benefit because most of the Palestinian labor, they are working on construction. So the construction sector is a very important sector there. And the losses, it's around like in the construction industry experienced a 35 drop in monthly output in 2024 and equating to a loss about $650 million. And also this led to reduced supply and project delay, higher housing price, and increased financial inflation. And there's also an impact on the agriculture sector. And now the debate is still continue, but it seems, and even that the Israeli security agency, they are recommending returning Palestinian worker, but most of the members, they are still opposed to this idea, and they don't want to rehire the Palestinian labor, and they want to pay the economic cost, and they don't care about any economic cost, but they make a permanent ban, and they don't want to rehire Palestinian workers. And we, from our side, we don't want to work on Israeli market. We want to refuse, and we want to work on a campaign boycotting working on Israeli market. Also, even although there is many costs and economically costs, but we have to work on a resistance economy, and we have to work on a plans that we can like initiating new industries and to think about how to gradually disengage from the Israeli economy and to finish this relation gradually and to hire the Palestinian labor in the Palestinian market. Even it will not be economically benefited, but it will be benefited for us on the long term, and it will be benefited for our dignity. So that's all, and thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lamees. Now we have with us Shir Hever from Berlin. Shir is a graduate from Free University of Berlin. He is also the coordinator of the military embargo campaign of the BDS movement. His recent book is The Privatization of Israeli Security. 2017 with Pluto Press, and he has a wonderful other book that, in a way, I think many of us read, which is actually called The Political Economy of Israel's Occupation, and that's of 2010, and it's a real classic. I hope you have a chance to take a look.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the chair for inviting me. Unfortunately, my book has become very outdated. But today I'll talk about more actual things. I want to start with a little bit of the scientific part very quickly. The most controversial thing I have to say today, for this audience at least, is that I think that a materialist understanding of the Israeli economy is not giving us the full picture. And I think we need to look at the symbolic importance of economic developments, something that for Marx was part of the superstructure, but I think it is very significant for us. And here I think that we have to understand that a capitalist system is based on a concept of constant growth and a perspective of the future. Once this is not secure, and the sense is that the future is that there is no future, actually, then there is no investment. And there's no investment, there's no profit, and the whole system starts to collapse. I personally tend to belong to the political economy school of institutional thinking of Thorstein Veblen, So I think it's very interesting to look at the Israeli institutions and what happened to them in the last year and a half, where if a lot of Israelis say, well, there are no institutions anymore. So the state doesn't function as a state. And if people have lost all of their faith in the police, in the courts, in the media, in the transportation system, the health system, and so on, it means that actually there is no state of Israel. There is some kind of momentum, there is a war, there is a genocide, the weapons are there, the soldiers, like zombies, are killing out of momentum, but what is the prospect for the future? So one last thing I want to say about the scientific part is that when Israel transformed from a collectivist, corporatist structure, which is, I don't want to say socialism, because it's socialism for one ethnic group, so it's corporatism, into a rabid capitalist system in the 80s through a structural adjustment program, then it lost the social contract that made it possible to recruit the population for military service, for the national projects, for the making sacrifices for the nation. Without that, there is no basis of support. But here, I am surprised to see that with this collapse of the Israeli state and economy that's happening in front of our eyes, the ones who are betraying their capitalist loyalties are actually the corporate media, which is the financial corporate media like Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. These media are supposed to be loyal to the investors and tell them the facts that they need in order to make stories, to make decisions about investment, and yet they refuse to report on what's happening to the Israeli economy. My own articles have been rejected, but I'm not a particularly important writer. People who are far more famous and influential couldn't publish reports about the Israeli economy in these newspapers because, of course, once the facts are known, nobody will want to invest in this economy. So, enough about science. I came here not to talk about theory, but about practice. And I want to talk about BDS. The BDS movement has never been more powerful and successful around the world. This is a bittersweet moment because, of course, I think we would all rather live in a world where BDS is not necessary. And the growth of BDS is directly proportioned to the atrocities committed against the Palestinian people. Nevertheless, we need to recognize what is happening with BDS. I'll start with boycott from below. Just this week, there was a report about a survey that was conducted worldwide of people where they were asked to evaluate the brand value of different countries. Which countries they consider to be good countries or destabilizing countries. Do they like to buy something that is written made in the USA, made in Germany, made in Israel? Israel, for the first time, has gotten the last place in this report, below North Korea. So Moving on to divestment. 90% of investments in the Israeli high-tech sector have disappeared. This is, I think when I was saying that the financial media is not interested in reporting about what's happening to the Israeli economy, this doesn't mean that the Israelis don't know. The Israelis know what's happening better than anyone else. And so more than 50% of all the investments through financial funds within Israel, and this includes all the institutional investors. I say institutional not to confuse with institutional political economy. I mean banks, insurance companies, financial investors. More than 50% of those funds have been transferred abroad, because why would you invest in an economy that you don't think has a future? And because of this, the financial crisis in Israel is very, very deep, very deep. Right now, if you're looking at the most actual indicators, it looks like there's a recovery because people believe that the ceasefire will be sustainable, and somehow the Israeli economy will be able to regrow and reconstruct. But it's not. It doesn't have the tools to do so, and I will explain why. But when the genocide started, and it was a tremendous burden on the Israeli economy from the beginning, the chairman of the central bank said, if this war will end up costing $50 billion, the Israeli economy will be ruined. So we have to have a ceasefire right away. That's something he said in November 2023. In the last year, I'm still on the topic of divestment, there were 2 divestment actions that are worth mentioning. Intel, the world's largest chip manufacturer, now number 2, decided to cancel its plans to invest $25 billion in an Israeli manufacturing plan because they didn't see any prospects for this investment. Then Google, who was poised to purchase an Israeli company called Wix, has changed its mind and canceled the purchase with $23 billion. So 23 billion plus 25 billion, that's almost $50 billion right there, not including the actual cost of the war. I remind you, the chairman of the central bank said 50 billion is what Israel cannot afford. So we're way past that point. Moving on to sanctions. The sanctions is the last stage of BDS. I mean, the 3 letters come at a certain order for a reason. Governments are the last to act. Nevertheless, let me give you one example of a discussion that just happened in the Israeli Ministry of Energy, where the chief scientists and engineers in Israel were telling the Ministry of Energy, Israel is dependent on coal and cannot, under any circumstances, stop relying on coal for electricity production because there's just not enough natural gas to produce electricity that Israel needs. But the Ministry of Energy said, we don't care, we're going to import natural gas if necessary, because the biggest supplier of coal to Israel, which is Colombia, has stopped coal shipments to Israel. Coal is a dual-use item. And therefore, Israel doesn't have a choice. So the Ministry of Energy is disguising the fact that there are sanctions as if it's an environmental decision to use gas for energy, while at the same time they're burning diesel in order to produce electricity so that the population doesn't feel the fact that electricity production is declining because of the coal shortage. So burning diesel is the worst thing you can do in terms of the environment. And I have to mention that the International Court of Justice on July 19th has published its advisory opinion saying that the occupation is illegal. It's a war crime. And that Israel is an apartheid state, and that third states are obligated to impose sanctions on Israel. On September 28th, the United Nations voted to adopt this advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice with a 2/3 majority. 124 countries voted yes. Only 14 countries voted no, among them Israel, the gigantic Micronesia, and also the United States, but for unsurprising reasons. But this means that the United Nations has taken an obligatory decision to sanction Israel until the occupation ends. So sanctions are no longer an option, now they're an obligation. I want to say something about the military embargo because this is my focus within the BDS movement. This is what I'm working on all the time. And it is a bit weird to talk about the military embargo when I'm in the United States, the country that ignores international law and continues to provide billions of dollars worth of weapons to Israel, seconded by Germany. But the United States continues to be the biggest provider of weapons. But but the United States is in a small minority. And this is something worth mentioning because I think we've been in the panels, and when we were talking about this panel, it was described as if it's like a conversation that's happening in the margins, as if we are the rebels. But I know that people here in the audience love to associate with the underdog. This is part of being a progressive. I completely understand this. But I'm sorry, the situation has reversed. The world has spoken up on the side of Palestine. The Palestinians are the police in the sense of they speak for law, for international law, and the criminals are Israel. So other than the United States, which is now announcing sanctions against the ICC, the rest of the world is not taking this seriously. And all these weapons coming from the United States, in order to make it to Israel, they have to pass through other countries. And already Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Belgium and the Netherlands have made decisions or court decisions and saying that they will not allow these weapons to pass. In Greece and Cyprus, the unions are blocking these shipments with their bodies because they're obeying international law, and the weapons are being at least slowed down, not yet stopped, but we are talking about the only country that is willing to keep those shipments doesn't have a border with Israel. They have to send it through other countries. So I want to say something about intersectionalism, because the BDS movement is an intersectional movement, and we have to understand that in this moment, especially when it feels so dark and depressing with President Trump and his statements, the power that we have is through unity that comes from many different groups coming together, and Trump is uniting us in that sense. So this gives us the power to support BDS more than ever, and this is, I think, one of the reasons that BDS is growing so fast and is so powerful is because of its intersectional nature. And even, I mean, I live in Germany, where the government is trying so hard to criminalize BDS, trying so hard to make the lives of BDS activists difficult, but they can't, because, again, Palestinians are on the side of the law. And it's the very few governments in the world that refuse to recognize that are on the side of the criminals, and they will have to give account for it. Because I have a little bit more time, I wanted to say just one thing on a personal note. Because I have to say that the combination of BDS and genocide is something, like in terms of this historic period that we are living through. As a Jew is something that affected me and still affects me very much. When the genocide started, of course there were scholars, legal scholars and historians who were talking about the genocide, but I'm not a scholar of genocide. For me, genocide is something that I've learned from the stories of my grandmother, because I am Jew and my family is from Poland and had to escape the Nazis, and those who didn't escape were murdered. So I was thinking, is BDS even relevant? Because Jews tried to boycott Nazi Germany as a way of resisting a genocide, and it didn't work. And a fascist genocidal state cannot be stopped with, non-violent grassroots protests. That didn't work. And I had a very serious crisis of faith. But I have to say now, a year and a half later, that I have to recognize the reality. We are not in the 30s and the 40s anymore. We are in a different world. We have international institutions. We have the UN, we have the ICJ, we have the ICC. We have the Global South speaking up for humanity. What we didn't have 80 years ago. So now humanity is at a stage where it is possible to stop a genocide and to achieve justice with these methods of intersectional, grassroots, and progressive movement. So now we can see this happening with BDS, and I hope that all of you will join. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And finally, Ibrahim Shikaki. So happy you're here with us. Assistant Professor of Economics at Trinity College in Connecticut. Ibrahim has a PhD from the New School for Social Research in New York and held teaching positions at the New School, the International University College of Turin, the IUC, Birzeit and Al-Quds University. He also held research in several research positions at the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, so Raja's Institute, MAS, in Ramallah. His recent publications include a journal article on modeling the Palestinian economy, a book chapter on the political economy of dependency and class formation in Palestine, and a foreign policy piece on the dangers of economic peace. All incredible. I learned so much from you, Ibra. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. I was telling some of my colleagues, I think I watched too many mediocre Hollywood movies where the speaker is supposed to say something and they have it written. And then the last moment, she or he decides, I'm going to rip this apart and I'm going to say something completely new. And after listening to the president yesterday, that's what I did, unfortunately. For me, which is why I spent this morning writing something that still connects Palestine to heterodoxy and political economy, but also kind of responding to some of those notes. So let me first start by thanking Jisoo and Bruno and Clara and Scott and everybody who is responsible for this project. As somebody who works at the intersection of heterodox economics and the political economy of Palestine, this is emotional for me. This is my community. This is my collective. And I really do appreciate being able to be here and speaking to you. I also wanted to thank the president of the University of Tulsa, first for his vision and support for this idea, but also for his remarks. I'll admit, hearing his opposition to a panel that I'm at is not the most welcoming, but I'm sure we all here have thick skin and we've faced much worse than this. And while I disagree with him, I do want to take him by his offer and to use this space to explain precisely why it is crucial to discuss Palestine in the way that we are discussing it here today. It is quite common to hear demands about representing everybody. Interestingly, when Matthias talks about conflict, he's not asked to bring in the capitalists here. And when Bob talks about the oligarchic tendencies, he's not asked to bring those people here. But when we talk about Palestine, it's expected to do that. And I get it. Listen, if this was something about international relations or about the Palestinian-Israeli or Arab-Israeli negotiations, it might be an acceptable idea. But this is a gathering about heterodox economics. There are no equal sides here, Anwar, right? Now, death is equal, yes. Sorrow is equal. The tears of a mother holding a baby is equal. But that's only one side of the coin. We're taught as heterodox economics not only to look at one side, the exchange sphere. The exchange sphere, everything is equal, right? When you go and you buy $20 worth of a cup of coffee, it's an equal exchange because you approve and they approve. When you go work for a minimum wage, that's an equal exchange in the labor market. When you go and you pay 25% on the credit card, that's an equal exchange. When we only look at the exchange sphere, everything is an equal interaction. But then we're told in heterodox economics to look at the production sphere. That's where conflict and power arises. And just like that, when we talk about Palestine, just focusing on the issue of death being equal and sadness being equal is not enough, because in this context, power is unequal. Might is unequal. Aggression is unequal. And heterodox economics, as I understand it, is exactly about that. It is about power and it is about inequality. See, heterodox economics is not only about how production functions cannot be aggregated, about how economic growth can be demand-led, about how growth paths do not automatically revert to their previous trends. Heterodox economics is not only about the determinants of investment functions, or about animal spirits, or about emerging properties. My mentor would say, well, they used to call them dialectics, now they're called emerging properties. But heterodox economics is not only about that. At its core, it is about power and inequality. And I understand everything, the way that I was taught it, as inequality. Inequality in terms of uneven development, inequality within the conflict of the main class relation between capital and labor, inequality within stratification of economics by looking at race and gender and other stratification, inequality of who bears the brunt of environmental degradation, who collects the fruit of growth, and who is first to be hit at times of downturn, that inequality. This is where I believe heterodoxy and Palestine intersect. And that's where heterodox economics can provide, I believe, insight and tools that do not exist in the mainstream. And just like Clara mentioned, I think one of those tools that is extremely relevant is to understand the role of history, both the history of thought, but also economic history. So a lot of times when I speak nowadays, I tell them, listen, I don't need to give you that daily newsletter of genocide, the death, the destruction, all of that. You can get that readily. And because Palestinians are dehumanized, we have it televised. We have a televised genocide going on. But I do think understanding how we got here today is where we can add something. So today it's important to understand that economic history of the political economy in Palestine. One recent decision that has been overlooked, you're right, a little bit given there's everything going on, was that ICJ ruling in July, basically saying that the occupation is illegal. So a few people, legal scholars in the UK, got in touch with me and said, Ibrahim, there's this interesting part, right? In it, it says, it is the responsibility of those countries, the third parties, to distinguish dealings with Israel between its own territory and the occupied Palestinian territory. There's a fallacy there a little bit, I feel, because it's almost like we're saying there's two hypothetical parts of Israel. And again, this is not unrelated to the president's remark. There's somehow a hypothetical standalone part within the Israeli economy that is okay to deal with. And then there's a segment of it connected to its settler colonial project. And again, when I say settler colonial project, I mean in the US, you sometimes get this pushback. Let's remember, it was called the Jewish Colonization Association, right? Nowadays, colonization is frowned upon, but that's exactly what the Zionist leaders foresee the Zionist movement. I was talking yesterday with Shir. The current Israeli military operation in the West Bank is now called the Iron Wall. And he asked me, do you know why it's called that? And I thought for a second, I'm like, there's no way that's Jabotinsky's Iron Wall. And he said, it's exactly that. So if you guys just read one thing after today about Palestine, the 1923 pamphlet that is available online by Ze'ev Jabotinsky is something to read. Ze'ev Jabotinsky is the ideological grandfather of revisionist Zionism of the Likud party that Netanyahu is the head of. And I do want to quote, because I believe these three quotes are the most important part of everything that I'm going to say. Very, very short. This is what Jabotinsky is saying in 1923. My readers have a general idea of the history of colonization in other countries. I suggest that they consider all the precedents and see if there is one solitary instance of any colonization being carried on with the consent of the native population. There is no such precedent. The native populations, civilized or uncivilized, have always stubbornly resisted the colonists. He says, we may tell them whatever we like about the innocence of our aims, watering them down and sweetening them with honeyed words to make them palatable. But they know what we want as well as we know what they don't want. Mr. President, here's what he says. They feel at least the same instinctive jealous love of Palestine as the old Aztecs felt for ancient Mexico and the Sioux for their rolling prairies. This is what Jabotinsky is saying. Zionist colonization, this is where the Iron Wall comes from. Zionist colonization, he calls it colonization, must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population, which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population behind an iron wall, which the native population cannot breach. And so when I say, when we talk about settler colonialism, this is in the words of the founding Zionist movement. So they got to me and they said, well, Ibrahim, can we have this division, right? There's a part of Israel that connects and a part that does not connect to settler colonialism. And my answer was, which obviously they knew, was absolutely not, right? And so there are 2 points that I want to mention related to that. First, the reason why you can't do that is that the path dependency of the Zionist settler colonial project, aided by the British Mandate and the Zionist organization, make a strong argument that the evolution of Israel's economy today would have not been possible had it not been for its colonial foundation. Very similar to the scholarship showing that the past dependency of today's US economy on slavery. So, Becker's book about slavery's capitalism and other works in that context. So it's important to understand that part before even the establishment of the State of Israel. Following the Balfour Declaration, which was in 1917, the British Mandate not only included in their charter in Article 6 that the British administration would facilitate Jewish immigration and encourage settlement by Jews, it deliberately facilitated the growth of the Jewish economy, this is before the establishment of the State of Israel, and imposed policies that would ultimately strip Palestinians from their main means of production, which is their land. What did the mandate do? The mandate required taxes in agriculture be in cash, not in kind, driving peasants into debt and borrowing with higher interest. It provided some of the first economic concessions of vital projects in Palestine, including the electricity company, the salt company, and other. But also, very importantly, how we are using trade, Pepe. The mandate was deliberate in skewing the tariff and trade policies to benefit Jewish industries. And so one example is that it would have high tariffs imposed on cement and chemicals, which were Jewish productions to protect the, kind of that infant industry protection of Jewish industries, while it had absolutely no tariffs on olive oil and soap, which were mainly Arab products at that time. So following those distortions, it's not a surprise that 25 years after the mandate, what you had was the weight of the overall Jewish economy overtook now its Arab counterpart. It grew from 19% of overall production to 53%, and the Jewish share of industrial manufacturing production was around 90%. Jewish capital investment became 90% of that total economy. So this is all before the State of Israel. Now, after the State of Israel was created, the extent to which the Palestinian economy became reliant on the Israeli goods and labor market, as Lamees mentioned, as well as Israel's policies of control over borders, natural resources, and financial resources, have also been instrumental in the current global standing of the Israeli economy. Israel would achieve significant economic benefits as a byproduct, Raja, of its continued settler colonial project, which aims to control the land and replace the native population. So Lamees mentioned the dependency on the labor market. This did start, especially after 1967, a huge wave of proletarianization, where you had self-employed Palestinians who were working in agriculture, losing their capital, and as Carl would say, only had their labor to sell, right? So Palestinian labor served Israel in a multitude of ways. Clearly, the introduction of this new pool of cheap labor curtailed wage inflation and ensured a steady profit for Israeli capitalists, but also that reserve army was utilized sometimes to quell conflict between Israeli capital and Israeli labor. So it suppressed the bargaining power of Jewish labor at times of recessions, right? Hey, we have this alternative for you, but also allowing for some sort of social mobility at times of growth. But it's not just Palestinian work in Israel, there was also Palestinian work for Israel, hiring Palestinian enterprises as subcontractors. One of the first places that I worked in as a 15-year-old was a small pillow workshop in Tulkarem that was actually a subcontractor for an Israeli company. Purchasing power, you see, that work in Israel and for Israel provided Palestinians with purchasing power, but purchasing power combined with that weak productive sector was basically a recipe for an ever-increasing trade deficit for Palestinians, and by the 1980s, more than 2/3 of all Palestinian trade was tied through Israel. So this dependency relation, if you want, on the Israeli labor and goods market created a huge structural distortion in the Palestinian economy and locked it in a cycle of underdevelopment. It was unable to develop a strong productive base. Its trade deficit skyrocketed, while on the other hand, Israel was able to plunder the natural resources, including land, water, and minerals, make use of the reserve army of labor to ensure low costs, and it opened up the Palestinian economy to its goods in order to guarantee, at least in the beginning, when that was a sizable part, that there's no crisis of overproduction. So in summary, these two reasons, first talking about the establishment of the State of Israel, the role of the British Mandate, the role of other Zionist organizations, but also after the establishment of the State of Israel, this dependency makes it almost impossible to say, well, hey, there's this naughty part of the Israeli economy that is connected somehow to a settler colonial project, and then there's a okay part that is not. And so the final two things that I will mention very kind of briefly that maybe we can discuss a little bit aside from this notion of dependency and talking about what the Palestinian economy looks like and that political economy and the conflict of Palestinian labor vis-a-vis both Palestinian and Israeli capitalists. But there are two other points that I do want to mention that maybe we don't discuss enough here. And so the first is the usefulness of heterodox economics to understand political phenomena as well. Even that old vintage good dependency theory, Ingrid, tells us about the role of the comprador, right? That you have a segment within the periphery that has its interests aligned with that of the core. And it's very important to understand that if you're looking at the Palestinian Authority today, and please, if you're interested in that, just read about the Palestinian Authority's recent operation in the Jenin refugee camp just in the last 2 weeks. So understanding the role of the Palestinian Authority in that sense is important. And second, while clearly everybody here agrees that there's not a mere economic solution for a political issue, neglecting the economics can be very dangerous. And I always talk about this and always talk about the role of South Africa as a cautionary tale. It teaches us that you can rid yourself sometimes of political apartheid, but that has just translated to a form of economic apartheid as well. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Thank you for bearing with me, and I hope we can talk more about this in some of these discussions.
That was great. So the panel collectively decided that we're skipping the second round of comments to have more time for questions. So we'll collect a couple and then we'll give it back to the floor so you have plenty of time to answer. We have 45 minutes, so it's a good amount of time. Okay, wonderful. So maybe I can take one of these. Okay, yes.
My name is Sam. I'm unemployed and I'm a college dropout, but I'm here. And I had a question about Dr. Shir. You made a point that historical materialism isn't enough, and I was hoping you could expand on what you meant about symbols and how that is like diametrically opposed to historical materialism.
Thank you so much. That was just really, really, really amazing. I just have two questions. So one was, sorry, just looking at my notes. Yeah, Raja, that you were saying that one of the first things that you said was the heterodox economics for Palestine is mostly not Marxist. And I just wonder if you could expand a little bit on why that is. You know, is it about assassination of Marxists, or is there an? Sorry. You want yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay, oh, this is for, okay, it's for everyone. And also, what are the implications of that? And then the other one for Shir, because you mentioned the BDS movement and, you know, how it didn't work in the case of the Nazis. But, you know, building on what Ibrahim said at the end, how about, like, a lot of people draw parallels between the BDS movement in South Africa, ending the political apartheid, not the economic one, and what's happening now? And, like, what do you see about, like, what are the differences between those two movements, and what can we learn from that?
I suggest for those who ask questions to stand up and maybe look at the audience so they can hear better. Short question. Please stand up.
Yes, I know that this particular the last few paragraphs that can be produced locally, I was thinking that the Zapatistas and the Kurds in Rojava were acting on trying to create their own institutions, including their own food production, their own clinics, their own housing, all the stuff that's done by capitalism with the state. They wanted to do it locally with their communities. That seems like something that maybe the people in Palestine could look at and learn from and maybe help create something similar.
Thank you so much. Yes, so we have 4 here. So let's do, yes.
All right, so Sirisha Naidu from University of Missouri, Kansas City. And I have a question. I think it's for everyone, but I think it stems from what you talked about, Shir. You made this distinction between a materialist understanding and a symbolic understanding, but nothing that I've heard in today's presentation suggests that the symbolic and the material are different from each other. And that goes back to also, you know, I work on agrarian political economy and, you know, sort of resistance against dispossession, whether it's agrarian land or, you know, like ecological resources. And all of the resources, you know, whether it's the land back movement here, or it's the return to land and homeland, or in the Indian context, it's the call for, you know, what is, in Hindi, it's Jal Jangal Zameen, which is water, land, and water, forest, and land. I mean, so as much as it is represented as symbolic, it's also very much a materialist demand, but an understanding perhaps that we don't seem to have fully incorporated into heterodox economics and our understanding of political economy, because we think of it in terms of sort of perhaps in terms of the capitalist understanding of what is material. And maybe is there, you know, it seems to me that not that this is the moment, but perhaps because we're all gathered here, that this may be a way of rethinking how we understand the material and maybe not separating it from the symbolic.
Okay, so let's get 2 more, and then maybe we can do a second round. Is that okay? Because otherwise it seems too many. Matthias, here you are.
Very short question. So I know Ibrahim has worked on this, but I don't know if Raja or anybody wants to the fact that that there is no Palestinian currency, and obviously that's sort of an issue. So a little bit of the history of how any debt is foreign debt, and debt to the state of Israel in a sense, which is a complicated thing.
Okay, so there's competition here. So we do Steve, then Scott, and then we take one more, and then we take the other second round, okay? I'll make sure we get the
Steve Marr, thanks for the presentations. One thing I work on and think about a bit is the American empire. And so one question that came up for me when you guys were giving your excellent presentations was, the role of the American empire and American foreign investment and so on in sustaining the Israeli economy and in sustaining the genocide that's currently happening. And in particular, we think of, in Marxian political economy, we think of capital as a social relation. So when American capitalists invest in Israel, for example, they're also creating social relations vis-a-vis the Israeli capitalist class, which has, in other contexts at least, tended to break down distinctly national interests. So American capital, to what extent and in what ways is it implicated in the interests of the Israeli ruling class and in the economic status of the Israeli economy?
Thank you, great. Last one from Scott, and then we do a second round.
I'll be real quick. I just wanted to thank you very much for the panel session here. I just maybe give us some advice as to how to handle our president here, right, in terms of what we're doing. And his name is Brad-Carson at utulsa.edu. By all means, feel free to email him and let him know what a wonderful session we had here, okay?
Alrighty, so back to you. If you can keep like 2-3 minutes so we can get a second round, that would be great.
Thank you. I mean, I asked myself the same question, and I mean, one of the few, I've read pretty much everything anybody's written about the Palestinian economy, Israelis, Palestinians, World Bank, everybody, I think, mostly. And there have been no Marxist economists who've written in any sort of with any depth, with any rigor, except perhaps one of the few things that examples is the work that Ibrahim is doing, because I think he's grounded himself in a way that other Palestinians haven't. You see, so hence, but I also think it's not just because it hasn't happened. I think there's a reason, and the reason is, and this remains to be disproven, that this struggle, this conflict, this settler colonial ideologically driven struggle is really not very amenable to Marxist economic analysis. I mean, I don't really see, you mentioned proletarianization. Yeah, there's been, but is it really a proletariat in the Marxist sense of it's a working class that's been dispossessed of its, yes, I mean, but this, the best, in my view, most appropriate economic theory to discuss this is not even settler colonial studies. It's classical development theory. I mean, Prebisch and all of that. That's how I understand the relation between these poorer Palestinian economies and Israeli capital. Now, that other thing, the U.S. empire, U.S. capital, certainly, absolutely. But does that drive the Zionism, or does the Zionism drive the capital alliances? And the same would apply to those alliances that emerge. I mean, Adam Hani is probably the most rigorous Palestinian Marxist treatment that we've had, but it's been more of he's looked at as well the linkages between Palestinian, Arab, and, well, not Israeli capital, Palestinian and Arab capital. And that's an interesting thing, that we don't really have any examples of Palestinian-Israeli capital collaboration. Commercial, brokerage, agents, yes, but joint investments, coordination of strategy, I don't think it, so hence I really believe that the national struggle continues to drive a wedge between the normal processes of liberal market development. Currency, briefly, we don't have a coherent economy. You have to have a macroeconomy. We don't have one. But anyhow, Heiner wrote a study for us in 2018, literally about these the macro imbalances and the balance of payments, constraints that make it impossible to think of a currency with the sort of economy we have. I wanted to, though, just because there's not been much controversy between you guys. Everybody seems to agree with each other. I tend to disagree with two of my colleagues. I mean, I think there's a very good reason to single out the settlement economy rather than the Israeli economy. There are good political reasons, there are legal reasons, there are even ideological reasons. And I think there are economic reasons, because you can hurt the settlement economy if you can properly identify it, isolate it, and sanction it in a way that you're never going to be able to. $50 billion or $40 billion of disinvestment is, of course, Israel took a blow. And that's my other disagreement. I don't think Israel is as imminently facing the sort of economic crisis that you see, Shir. But we can, let's leave that to the arguments later. I just wanted to have my own chance. Here, you next.
So I'm going to talk that the Israeli policies, contribute, and the British mandate also, and the policies under the British mandate, it's contribute in enhancing and creating the class transformation from being self-employed in your own land and to be, which means the proletarization, to be to be a wage worker in Israeli market, and also it's enhance the individualism, because when they create the permission and when they create this relation, there is the dependency and the relation between Israeli and Palestinian economy. It took many forms. One of it is the Palestinian labor in Israeli market, but there is also the smuggling. It's also the brokers. There is many kind of relation, and this relation enhance the individualism. Before that, the Palestinian community is a collectivism, and we live together and we have this common life. So because of the practice and also the new liberal policies and also that taken by the Palestinian Authority, it's also enhanced the individualism. And now we face it with the deterioration of the economic situation. We face this problem, and we see the impact of this individualism. Thank you.
I knew that the most controversial thing I'm going to say was about historical materialism, and that's why I got two questions about it. And this is not the hill I want to die on, because really the point is not to start a theoretical argument here for which I'm very ill-equipped. Rather, I want to use this as an opportunity just to talk about examples of what concretely is happening and what I mean by this difference between materialism and symbolism. When people like Raja are telling me, look, the Palestinians don't have as much money and capital and power and influence as the Israelis. The Israeli economy is so much bigger, so how can I talk about an imminent Palestinian victory and an imminent Israeli collapse? I think that the answer is really in the symbols, in the perspective of people, in their expectations, in the story that they tell themselves about what's happening. I just heard an Israeli scholar quoting The Wire, the show The Wire, where they said, war is not about victory, it's about who loses less quickly. Because, of course, the suffering and destruction that Palestinians are experiencing is unprecedented in the history of Palestine. It's unfathomable, but they're not losing hope. And the Israelis are losing hope. Raja defined Zionism as the desire to have safe space for a Jewish community in Palestine. And a lot of people are saying, well, it's not safe. Actually, this is that Zionism has completely failed because they don't feel safe. And again, the material thing is not important. It doesn't matter if there were periods in the history of Israel in which Israelis were statistically less safe than they are now. But the fact that the Israelis don't feel safe, it's because that the imagined structure of their political institutions is falling apart. This is all in the world of symbols, but it has real concrete results when people take their families and leave the country. If you want, I can give some numbers about the people who are leaving and what kind of people are leaving. I mean, this is something that is just people are voting with their feet about what they feel about the future. And this is what I'm trying to say about this symbolic shift, the sense that Zionism has come to an end, the sense that the Israeli national narrative has lost its legitimacy, it's lost its trajectory, and we are now in a period of decolonization. A very painful and difficult one. And this brings me to the second question about BDS, because, well, just to clarify, the word BDS, the movement BDS is a Palestinian movement. When we talk about other boycott movements, there have been many boycott movements in history, including Palestinian boycott movements. They were not called BDS, they had, and each one is unique and has its own successes and failures. The Palestinians have suffered for such a long period of colonization that they have the advantage of learning from the mistakes of others. And of course, South Africa is an inspiration, but also, you know, parallel to South Africa, there was another country that was recognized by the United Nations as an apartheid state, Rhodesia. And there was not such a powerful movement of boycott against Rhodesia like there was against South Africa. And if you look at what happened with Rhodesia, which is known today as Zimbabwe, it was also decolonized in a different path. I think we can agree that the trajectory of South Africa was better. And that was also the decision of Palestinians to build the BDS movement according to these principles, because they wanted to be inspired by South Africa, but also, as Ibrahim says, to learn from the mistakes and to do it better this time. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
So Ingrid, on your point, I feel part of the reason why you don't have that, and this is maybe in the later stage, in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years, is also about the type of economic research on the Palestinian economy that kind of proliferated after the late 80s and early 90s. So similar to a lot of places, the education is mostly in neoclassical economics, but in the late 80s and early 90s, international financial institutions started becoming kind of the core source for economic research. The World Bank had this very famous 6-volume called An Investment in Peace. And so that was kind of following this, you know, neoclassical mainstream approach to economics. There are a few, I mean, one of the first things that I've read is the work of Adel Samara, who does have a Marxist kind of tradition behind his work. This summer when I was in Palestine, I was going over the archive. The Palestinian Liberation Organization had this magazine called Samad. And I went over it starting from the late 1970s. It started in 1978. And you actually find a lot of articles. Again, it's not established scholars who are writing academically, but you find a lot of discussion that is very close to the Marxian tradition, that is very close to the notion of conflict and talking about globalized capitalism. But I do believe that that kind of push that happened kind of got everywhere around this. I also believe there was a lot of Marxist tradition, but not in economics. And so you found a lot of that in sociology and in other aspects, but not necessarily economics. I mean, what Raja is talking about the settlement, and we discussed this, a lot of times when you do politics, it's very difficult then to kind of say, well, but I'm not, right now, I'm not doing politics. And so when I say I do not want to differentiate, because I don't want to say that a product of a settlement that was built on the West Bank is problematic because that is land stolen by Palestinians. And then a product that was produced in Rehovot, which is built on my grandfather's village around Zarnuqa, is fine because that was built on the state of Israel. But what I'm saying is, there is a difference, and when you want to talk about policy and you want to talk about tactics and you want about targeting, I can get that. But that's not necessarily what you present in terms of the argument. Matthias, it's about tools. So it was very important. In 1993-94, Oslo Accords, which are the peace agreements between the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Israel, were signed. The Paris Protocol, signed a year later, was an annex to Oslo II, and it had a bunch of sections on labor, on trade, and on policy. The notion was that there cannot be a Palestinian currency until the Joint Economic Committee, which never met, decides on that. It did actually give some policy in terms of fiscal policy. So it said, now the Palestinian Authority, you know what, you can collect your own money. But 80% of the financial resources that the Palestinians collect are through clearance and tax and tariffs. And so that is in the hand of the Israelis. So even that small tool, the fiscal tool that Palestinians had, for the last 20 years, they've been using as a political blackmail tool and saying, okay, you've gone to the UN to ask for membership, we're not going to give you 50%. Oh, you give money for the families of Palestinian prisoners, we're going to take 50% of that money and give it to the electricity company that you want. So it's also about limiting any control over policy, whether it is monetary or fiscal. The ramifications, again, are then, as Raja mentioned, maybe the last point, sir, to your point on, a lot of times we talk about this notion of a resistance economy. It's like a unicorn sometimes, but we did implement something similar. We called it this sumud, so steadfastness economics. And in the first Intifada, Palestinians decided we're not going to pay taxes for the Israelis, we're not going to buy Israeli products, and we're not going to go work in the Israeli economy. And it also meant working locally and working in small groups and civil disobedience, etc., etc. And so you also did have examples where Palestinians were thinking locally in small aspects. That, Ingrid, the magazine that I was reading about, so Samad, talks about the very long history of the Palestinian Liberation Organization working in Lebanon, basically under cooperatives. So it was basically worker-owned enterprises, small workshops that were working for a very long time. And in fact, and this is from somebody who was very close within the Palestinian Authority, early on between the negotiations, the economic negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians had some notion, and again, this is a person who was part of the PLO, so maybe they're pushing it too much, but they had some notion, we want the economy of Palestine to be somewhat connected to this idea of cooperates, of worker-owned enterprises. We have a very good example that we've had in Lebanon, and the World Bank, and this is written in their book, the World Bank tells them no. You sign now, and the president, later president that would become Yasser Arafat, signed, and they said, no, you have to get an official PLO signature saying that the type of economy you will have is a free, open market economy, and none of that nonsense about worker-owned enterprise and other aspects. And so there is some of that notion and that history, but we, unfortunately, we Palestinians have also shifted our alliances. We used to be connected to the global south. When I read from the 70s and the 80s, who were the people where Palestinians used to go to, who used to learn, who used to want to emulate, and today, the extreme reliance on international aid, but also personal debt in the last 10, 15 years has become extremely problematic. So it becomes very difficult to say some sort of autarkic kind of, I can separate myself from everything that is going on. But I think those are some of the comments that, for the questions that I had in mind. Of course, you're going to reply to me.
No, it's just about the Intifada. I mean, this is a discussion between comrades and colleagues. But you know, you need to read my article. I wrote a lot of the stuff that you talked about the important initiatives of the first Intifada, which were about household economy and communal return to agriculture and boycotting Israel. And if you recall, the first demands of the Intifada leadership were to end for workers to not work in Israel, and there was a boycott of 3 months, right? Wonderful, right? Now, how did the Intifada end?
with the same leadership calling on Israel to open up its labor market so that the workers who have not been allowed in for the last year can regain their jobs. So, this is the thing about praxis and one point. Secondly, I'd just like to say that it's maybe not the beginning of the end, Shir. I think it's the end of the beginning, in the sense that we've had, 50 years of this Israeli policy of asymmetric containment, which is now ended. Zionism is not ended. The state of Israel is not ended. So it's the end of a certain beginning of this struggle, maybe not the beginning of the end yet.
Okay, so we have 20 minutes exactly. So there's many questions. Let me get a sense of the whole room already. So let's go for those who haven't spoken yet. So here you are. You want to present yourself? Stand up if you can.
Hello, I'm Robbie Orr, an independent writer based in Tulsa. And the question for you all is sort of what can regular Americans do living in Tulsa or Des Moines or wherever in terms of showing solidarity. And the small thing that some of us are doing here, and just wanted to let you know, Give Gaza Hope is a group where we're just trying to raise money for families and have direct connections in Gaza. And if you're interested, as part of the first Fridays, we usually have a table out here. It'll be out on the street, just kitty or opposite Chowgirls and in front of some cannabis store.
Yeah, I think it's just a block away, your stand. Yeah, you'll see it. You'll see it. Okay, wonderful. Then we had some hands. Okay, so let me get you, and then you two, and then you two.
Hi, my name's Pamela. I lived in... Can you hear me? Yeah, there you go. My name is Pamela. I lived in Palestine for a couple of years. And so my question about sort of import substitution, if I understand it, trying to build up Palestinian industries. I have a friend named Fadi Quran who, for example, tried to build like a solar, company in Palestine. And of course, Israel controls imports, exports, building permits, currency, everything, travel. So they pulled any string they could pull and basically shut it down. So I'm just curious what Palestinians can actually do in the face of all that.
We have David over here, Rob. Alrighty. David first and Rob.
David McNally from the University of Houston. I wanted to, because Scott was asking us to write to your president to remind everybody that your president is not unique. And they are very vulnerable, however, over the right to education. And all of us who are educators in this room should check out the work of the Right to Education campaign in Palestine, because this is what the big breakthrough was at the American Historical Association meetings in January, where a resolution was overwhelmingly passed by 600 delegates against scholasticide in Palestine, the deliberate destruction of educational institutions, the murder of students, faculty, and staff by the Israeli war machine. And so going after our own university administrators on the right to education and over scholasticide is a wonderful way to open up this debate and discussion. And so I'd love to hear anything that the panelists have to say, and thank you to all of you on that point. One other quick point. We have, at the University of Houston, organized a Faculty for Justice in Palestine of about 20 faculty members. If we can do it in Texas, it can be done pretty much everywhere. So if anyone would like to speak during the breaks or what have you about how to organize Faculty for Justice in Palestine groups, please come talk to me and anybody else who's doing that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rob.
Hi, Bob Lord. And this question, I think, also connects to the American empire. My understanding is that a significant component of the Israeli economy is the development of military and surveillance technology. And the occupation fosters that because that technology is tested in the occupied territories. And as inhumane as it is, I think there are very powerful interests in both Israel and the United States, including, I suspect, the US military, that wants to see the perpetuation of that situation. And how much does that desire to perpetuate the situation create an obstacle to ending the occupation?
That's great. There's the wonderful book of Loewenstein exactly on that laboratory Palestine. We have two questions here, Drew, and who's first? No compliments.
Appreciate it. My name's Carter Reed. I'm a student from the University of Tulsa, and this is just to the entire panel, but the concept of developing a resistance economy is something that came up multiple times. And you mentioned short-term losses with the hopes of long-term benefits. What do you see starting as a tipping point or something that moves from the short-term losses to long-term benefits? And as kind of a follow-up, is there a precedent with any sort of post-genocide country or economy successfully doing that? Thank you.
Drew Wood, History Department. Thank you, panel. I'm with the guy who spoke at the last panel and feeling very practical, feet on the ground. Who's going to rebuild Gaza? Will it be, the U.S. Western Israeli corporate power alliance with their golf courses and condominiums led by Jared Kushner? That's one development plan, as we all know. And these guys are formidable. I recommend a thing that Loki, the rapper from Britain, posted seriously on Twitter this week. And that dude laid out a serious network of corporate Israeli Zionist alliances with lots and lots and lots of money together. So who will present an alternative? Who can the Palestinian people ally themselves with? What about Hamas? They're not crazy. They are strong, and they have won the military offensive, and Israel has lost. And yet, we need to move, they need to move, we all need to develop an alternative. What about BRICS? The U.S. government is on the wrong side of history. BRICS, the Russians, the Chinese, the Indonesians, seem to me to be the face and the people who are leading this planet if this planet is to survive. These are big questions, I know. But as economists, I'd like to hear about some of this stuff. I don't have answers as a historian, but I think we need to talk in bigger pictures and less about ideology and literature. Thank you.
Great. Alrighty, I think we should close the questions. As we'll take one in the front row here of this young man, and then.
Sorry, this is just to wrap up the materialism stuff. Sorry, Dr. Shir. But when it comes to like the social impact, the symbolic impact on the material, that still, just to wrap it all up, it still relates in terms of like the superstructure to the base, like the wariness or the fracture in the superstructure will ultimately lead to the destruction of the base that is the Israeli system. Anyway, I don't know. Will yeah.
I would close the questions because we have 10 minutes to answer, and if we want to give a round, yeah? Okay. We start with Ibra.
Okay. Weapons question, Shir, obviously. I want to address 2 points. Basically, 2 points in one, hopefully, to save time. First, the question about what Palestinians can do on the ground. Pamela was asking about Fadi, who me and Lamees know well in Palestine. And the other question about who will rebuild and what are the future alliances. And I think both those questions have to do with the issue of Palestinian representation, which is not something that we have had enough time really to discuss. And yet it is core, I believe, to discussing not only the political but also the economic kind of future of what can happen in Palestine. Hamas has said that it is willing to kind of, give the administration power of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. It's Israel who says that we don't want anybody, we only want us or the US. I don't think it's necessarily that, but it's also who are the Palestinian Authority putting themselves in alliance with. And I think that has been something. We have not had elections in the West Bank and Gaza Strip since 2006 and 2007. So our president is not really our president. Our legislative council is not really our legislative council. And that's also something problematic. And the reason for that is because currently the people who do have power, the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, do not want to go into elections because they know that they will lose the elections. And yet they are holding on to that power. And their alliances remain. As much as the West and the US has been doing, it still does remain. So for the question about BRICS, I absolutely believe that that is one way to go, but who has the power then? And again, you might say, well, Palestinians can, at least in this internal issue, can also organize, and Lamees will tell you, and everybody here will tell you, when Palestinians in the West Bank are protesting in support of their sisters and brothers in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority is arresting them. And so it's, again, important to understand that you have these multiple layers to reach places. And yeah, maybe I'll stop there because we don't have that much time. But Pamela, maybe I'll talk to you a little bit more about some of the details in person there.
Thank you, Bob, for the question about the military embargo, the weapons. This is somebody stop me if I get out of hand and talk about it for too long. This is, Israel is the most militarized economy in the world. But before the genocide started, 11% of Israeli exports were weapon exports. Since then, all of the Israeli economic sectors have collapsed, except for the military sector, which is showing growth. But what kind of growth? The biggest Israeli arms company is called Elbit Systems. Elbit Systems just published their annual reports for 2024, and they are showing an increase in revenue, an increase in operating profits, but almost all of this comes from domestic orders from the Israeli government. And they have a breakdown of the global exports around the world. They admit that they've lost more than half of all of their sales in the global south. Why? Because yes, Israeli companies are specialized in technology of oppression, technology of apartheid, surveillance, spyware, biometric tracking, facial recognition cameras. This is what they do. And everyone saw on October 7th that this surveillance technology didn't help them. It didn't protect them. And the process of genocide and the collapse of the Israeli institutions is also perceived by the Global South as a process of decolonization. And they're saying, even the most authoritarian regimes that are not making any moral decisions here, but the biggest customers of Israeli surveillance technology are the authoritarian regimes. But they're saying, why should we sign a contract with a country in decline? So that's why these companies are losing their customers, and the customers that they still rely on outside of Israel itself are mainly European customers, and it's mainly related to the war in Ukraine and the naivete of European countries that think that the Israeli military still has some kind of technological advantage, but let's face it, the genocide that we're seeing in Gaza, but also the invasion of Lebanon, Syria, and the West Bank, the killing is done mostly with American weapons. All of these Israeli technologies that Israel is still marketing, having tested it on civilians, on Palestinians, absolutely, but in order to kill large numbers of people, or in order to fight when there is actual resistance from the other side, these weapons are useless. That's an important lesson. So one last thing I want to say about this, because the Israeli government is now promoting a budget for the year 2025. They had to pass it already by October 24. They haven't. They're still working on passing this budget. According to this budget, they're going to spend tens of billions of dollars to build supply chains within Israel to make all of their weapons domestically as a response to the military embargo, because they don't believe they can import their weapons from abroad as they have so far, so they want to make everything. This is a throwback to what happened in 1967. The biggest arms supplier to Israel at the time was France. France imposed a military embargo on Israel. The Israelis said, oh, we'll just make everything ourselves. The artillery, the airplanes, the warships, everything domestically made. 6 years later, the war of 1973, which was a surprise attack on October 6, 50 years and 1 day before the October 7, and also in the middle of a Jewish holiday, the Israelis were taken by surprise, and all of these domestically made weapons were useless. They didn't work against the Soviet weapons that the Syrian and the Egyptian armies had. The amazing thing is that the Israelis have forgotten their own history completely. And they were only rescued in the war of 1973 with American weapons. And now they're saying, we won't rely on imported weapons anymore. We'll make everything domestically, and we're willing to spend tens of billions of dollars that we don't have because of the debt crisis, because of the economic decline, on these supply chains. And I mean, I think it shows exactly where they're going with this.
Okay, I'm going to talk about who will rule. So who will rule? The election will decide. This is what we want as a Palestinian. We want to hold the election, presidential and parliamentarian election, to see. And I think the people, the Palestinian people, they will choose the one that they work. They will not elect anymore this is what I think, actually, the BA again. So the floor for the one that he is working, and and for Gaza, the one that they are ruling under the ground, they have also to rule above the ground. So and about the resistance economy, if there is a will, there is a way, and we have the will. But the issue that the Palestinian Authority, they don't want to looking for a substitution for the from where we can get the electricity, the water, the basic. But if we are going to, there is many options to have electricity instead of Israeli market. So if we want to work on a resistance economy, we can, and there is many ways and a method to apply this and to gradually disengage with this with Israeli and to have our liberation. Thank you.
Okay, it's good this is ending, because it's going to start to disintegrate into partisan bickering otherwise. Relief, somebody mentioned the work you're doing helping families, and you mentioned work on scholasticide as campaign issues and as ways of concretely, I absolutely, totally salute any material assistance, any immediate, in help. I think that's all that, in fact, can be done, to be honest, from far away. There's, education, and scholasticide is an important issue, but you guys are going to have to worry, the academics, about the, forthcoming Department of Education investigations into anti-Semitism. I think they've decided on 6 campuses, by the way, so keep an eye out. The military-industrial complex, I won't say any more, but absolutely, it's essential to what is, this cementing of an Israeli imperial, if you wish, role in the region. On the resistance economy, all I will just add is that, the concept, as my colleagues, at least historically, it has been presented as a very small-scale, family-based, community-based type of no, I mean, if, a resistance economy needs industrial policy, it needs import substitution, it needs an active PA, which is not colluding with, Israeli capital, etc. I agree, but economic resistance is really about not having to be dependent on Israel, and that requires productive capacity. On the future, I would just say I think elections are overrated myself in the Palestinian context. And I think the idea of going back to elections for the 5 million Palestinians who happen to live under Israeli occupation is detrimental to the next phase of Palestinian agency and representation of our people. So for me, the four main tasks four main entry points for change and transformation in the coming year. Firstly, absolutely the resistance of the genocide needs to be supported. So however Palestinians are trying to resist the genocide, and if they are able to survive, that is a victory to be chalked up, right? Obviously, that's not enough. Palestinian unity is essential, and it takes precedence over democratic representation. Unity in a very broad sense, including the resistance factions, including Abbas, including the patriotic bourgeoisie, the working classes, the National Front, right? That's what we're supposedly, involved in a broad national front. So we need to rebuild that broad national front. Now, Israeli neo-Zionism is what I term it for the moment, for the want of a better word, in the sense that this is the fascist messianic brand of Zionism, which has been espoused by the coalition partners and which has been on ugly display over the last year and a half, and which, we have to admit, differs from the foundational Zionism that appeared to be transactional, that seemed to be willing to make a deal on the land, with the Palestinians. Maybe that was all a big deception, I don't know. But clearly this is a Zionism that needs to be repulsed, isolated, and ultimately removed from power. Will begin the process that you're seeing boiling under the surface in Israel. The schisms in Israeli society are much more than in our own Palestinian area. Finally, is obviously the rallying of global public opinion, but more importantly, which is it's rallied, and it's rallied so much that it's asking what next. But what next is really this question: why does it not translate into political changes and shifts in the countries, in these states' positions to Palestine? That's maybe going to come. Now, finally, I think the PLO is a dead. It no longer represents the Palestinian people. Because it represents only a portion of them. It carries a legitimacy of having been recognized as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, but it's forfeited that claim. The Hamas resistance movement, for all that it's achieved, it's also blamed among its own people for what's happened and for not having anticipated what came in the way of a genocidal response. And to be honest, its 15 years of rule in Gaza were not any better in terms of economic policy or in terms of political freedom than under the PA in the West Bank. So it also has seen its day. The PA was created for 5 years as an interim self-government authority. So it's also redundant. What remains? What remains? Remains something called the State of Palestine. Now, the State of Palestine, briefly, has been recognized by all of the countries of the world, but it's not recognized by the Palestinian people. So we don't use it as our address, as our agency, as our place where we build our institutions, where we eventually have elections for all the Palestinian people, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, for me, that's where our future lies. That's where we can find the unity we need. That's where we can present a reasonable or a persuasive narrative to the world, and that's where we can, lead towards liberation, I guess. That's the agency, the address. Thank you very much.
Thank you for an excellent panel and wonderful questions. We have a break now, around 20 minutes. There's some sweets, chocolates, coffee, and we're going to then have the last session of the day on class consciousness and community organizing, a key, I think, session followed by some pizza, and whoever wants to stay, a hopefully spontaneous assembly for those who want to try to organize concretely in Tulsa, or otherwise there's the first Friday for those who just want to mingle. Thank you.